Welcome to the Let's Be Real Estate Show, where we talk to real people about real experiences in the world of real estate. Today, we're going to be diving into estate law and probate, which is a very personal experience. However, with the proper planning and communication, it can absolutely change the game. Today, we're joined by guest Jeanette Mullet-Meisel, the owner of Ohio Heritage Law, based in Wadsworth, Ohio. She brings a really rare mix of a school psychologist and counselor for nearly 20 years before she went back to get her law degree, and now she serves families here doing estate planning and probate administration. Really look forward to this conversation. Let's be real. You were in the child psychology space.
I was, yeah.
And then now in the legal law space.
I did, yeah. I had kind of a winding path to
right.
where I am now. I actually worked as a school psychologist for about 18 years prior to going to law school and becoming an estate planning and probate attorney. Yeah. So I really got a great opportunity to learn a lot about family dynamics and, you know, really kind of understand the intricacies of, you know, people with differences, and really had a great career and a great opportunity in those years, and then just kind of felt a calling to something different. I had personally been touched by, the unexpected happening in my life when my father passed away suddenly when I was 7 years old. So I had had a personal experience with, things happening that are unexpected, and kind of having to walk through some of those things that are associated with a major life change. So with, that personal experience, and with the work that I had done with, children and families, and frankly with problem solving for people, and just kind of taking a messy situation, or taking something that's confusing or chaotic and figuring out a path forward. I really loved that part of my work. So going to law school and becoming an attorney was always a personal goal, and
even from a young age.
Even from a young age, even from a young age. It just, I guess, didn't feel like the right time yet when I was picking my first career. It did feel like the right time, several years ago. So I attended law school and graduated, and then opened my practice in Wadsworth. So I help families prepare for the unexpected, and then, unfortunately, if they have faced a life-changing event that has resulted in a probate administration, or trying to put the pieces together after losing a loved one, help them through that process as well.
I did want to ask you a little bit about your personal story with your father and how that's inspired your work today.
Yeah.
Did that experience what was it about that thing that brought you into your career today, right?
Yeah. I think I was like anybody else. I think my whole family was like anyone else prior to that happening, where you hear about these things happening to people. You hear about tragedies occurring in families. You, maybe plan for it, maybe you avoid it, whatever that looks like for you. But it always felt, separate and other until it happened, to us. And so I think living through that, I've heard about that, or I know that happens, to actually living it and actually having that happen really gives you a unique perspective on it. And I just have always really had a passion for helping people be prepared. If, I always say we plan for the worst and hope for the best. I hope that nobody ever needs the things that we, put in place. Some of them, unfortunately, are inevitable. We all are, going to need some of the things that we plan and prepare for. So I would say that was one of the biggest things that shaped my work, is just kind of going from that, like, that happens, to, that did happen. And, just really seeing how important it is to plan and prepare for that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a real connection between you and your clients, because you have some personal story. A friend of mine has always said, it's not a matter of if that'll happen, it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, there are bad things that do happen because of our, just the nature of our mortality, right?
Yeah,
so it's like, these things will happen. Death and taxes.
Death and taxes, it's true. And I'm a person who loves choice. I love a plan. And so, the earlier that we kind of get on these things and the more proactive we are, the more choice, the more opportunity you have. And so I love that about it too.
Yeah. So you mentioned like, it was just not the right time, but was there something specific that inspired you to say, now is the time? Because changing careers is a big deal. Especially like, they are related. There are some overlaps for sure, but it's not the same education
it was
track.
Like turning the Titanic around in a lot of ways. I guess I was kind of, approaching year 20. I was looking ahead at year 20 in my previous career, and I was kind of looking at that as the midpoint. We would get our state teachers retirement system, statements annually, and I can remember kind of looking at that one day when it came, and I was like, man, I'm like smack in the middle, and it just sort of felt like if I was going to make a change in that career, it was like then or never. And it just kind of, I thought, gosh, if not now, then when? It would have been something I think I would have been desperately sad if I didn't pursue. I would have had regret about it if I didn't. And so it just kind of felt like the right time.
It was worth climbing the mountain.
It was a climb, but it was worth it.
Now, this was around the pandemic time, right?
It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. It was.
Did pulling out, like going through that experience, getting your law degree, and obviously you were around it, you understood kind of the dynamics of families and that. Was there anything specific that you saw in families, their readiness or lack of readiness, like? Was it exposed differently because of the pandemic?
I think for sure. I think, you saw that scramble in a lot of families where someone had lost capacity unexpectedly or, families had to, scatter or separate for work or, somebody, unfortunately passed away of COVID untimely, or somebody had long COVID and they were facing a disability or, they were connected to a ventilator and we had to make some really difficult, calls about their health care, and I just saw a lot of families that hadn't had those conversations that were kind of left flat-footed, and I think that definitely had an impact in my decision to join that charge and hopefully make people at least more aware of their options and how they can better approach those situations.
So just for some simple definitions, like estate plan, can you take us through like just a high level for someone that doesn't know exactly what estate plan or doesn't have one in place? What is that? What is that process?
Absolutely. So just at the very base level, I always tell my staff when I'm training new people, our estate planning clients are alive. Are they? So that's during your lifetime. So if you're making an estate plan, you're alive and you're making choices and decisions. I think most commonly people think about estate planning in terms of who will administer their estate after they pass away, so who might be the executor of their will, for instance, and who might get their stuff, or how they might divide their assets. And that's definitely a big part of it. But there's this other piece of estate planning that I would argue that might even be more important or more relevant. And that is, who is going to be your decision maker? Who's going to, speak for you on behalf of your healthcare choices and decisions? Who's going to carry on your legal and financial life? Who's going to pay your bills and write your checks and reposition your assets and, keep your real estate in good shape or sell your house if you need to, in those circumstances where you might be alive but have lost capacity to do that for yourself. So when we talk about estate planning, we're talking about those two sides of the coin. We're talking about during your lifetime and your potential incapacity, whether that's your incapacity to make health care and or legal and financial decisions. If you're a parent or have someone who's dependent on you because they're a minor or because they're a person with a disability, it also involves, making plans for who would carry on those responsibilities and who would step into those important caregiving and decision-making roles. Again, if you became incapacitated during your lifetime, and then also on that other side, if you were to pass away, who wraps things up, who takes care of them, and who gets everything.
Sure, who gets the stuff.
Absolutely.
So if somebody walks through, again, from a definitional standpoint, somebody in this, estate, people who are doing estates are alive, okay? And which I want to circle back to that for a second, but if somebody has a will, does not have a will, or a trust. Are those kind of like the three options? Either no will, don't do anything, have a plan in place, and or a trust, right?
Yeah.
So what is the best of the three? Is there a best? Is it personal?
It's super personal. I get that question. It's probably the most common question that we get is, what should I have? Or I have this, is it the right thing for me? And I always tell people we really need to have a conversation about it. It's really a matter of looking at your situation, your family structure. It's about looking, asset by asset of what's in your estate, and coming up with the best plan.
Okay. So personal.
Very personal.
So if somebody, so there's this term probate. What is probate?
Yeah, so probate is the post-death administration. So if we're talking about a probate administration, we've crossed that line and the person is deceased. So our probate, estates are for people who have passed away. Typically, we're working with someone who's lost a loved one.
Sure.
And they're working to settle their estate. But probate is the court overseen process, or the court process of administering a decedent's estate. So after you've passed away, if you have a will, and that's another thing a lot of people don't understand. They think if they have a will, the property will automatically pass, to the people that they've named in the will and according to the distribution schedule that they've set forth in their will. But actually, that will is really kind of a letter to the probate court. It's your instructions to the probate court for that court overseen process that lets the judge know, the magistrate know, who you want to be in charge and how you want your assets distributed. But it is ultimately under the supervision and the authority of the probate court.
I hear a lot, I have a will, I don't need to do probate.
Right.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on that. Can you what is the thinking there? Why would somebody think I have a will? Because it's like, well, we can figure this out ourselves.
Sure, absolutely.
Versus I have a will and I can avoid probate. Is that true or false?
Yeah, so I would say it's somewhere in the middle, right? It's, all the classic lawyer line is, it depends, right? Here are my notes on that. So just items that pass through a will, or assets or property that passes through a will, that's automatically, whether it's your furniture or, your house, that's technically under the purview of the probate court. It's under their authority to oversee that. Whoever you name as the executor of your estate has to, provide certain information and meet certain deadlines and, provide, kind of play by the court's rules. And it requires notifying certain family members, even if they're not mentioned in the will, just because they're related to you at a certain level. They have to be notified of a lot of the proceedings. So that surprises people too. But to answer your question about, why people might have that perception, I think it's a logical conclusion. You've done this work to organize your estate and communicate your wishes in a will. It's very logical to think that, that takes care of it. But I think the piece that people miss is that, it's really just your instructions to, I think a helpful way to think about it practically is that you are writing a letter to the judge, to the probate court. This is kind of your letter of instruction to them. The asterisk there, and why I said, it kind of depends on whether probate, is actually required, is there are some probate avoidance techniques that you can use, like transfer on death designations. For instance, in Ohio, we can make what's called a transfer on death designation affidavit. It's the longest word ever. We might hear it called the TODDA. But it does allow you to execute and record at your county recorder's office an affidavit saying who you want to be the transfer on death recipient of your property. So a lot of folks have taken that step to make that transfer on death designation. And if you have, then your real estate would pass to those folks outside of probate. Similarly, many people have beneficiaries designated on their financial accounts. So if you have life insurance, if you have any type of retirement account like an IRA or 401k, those almost always require you to have a beneficiary. Not always. I see them, on a weekly basis that, one slipped through. But a lot of times they will kind of funnel you in and make you designate a beneficiary. If you've done that, that asset will go directly to that beneficiary outside of probate. Similarly, at your regular bank account, with your checking and savings, you can designate a beneficiary or a pay on death beneficiary, transfer on death beneficiary to those accounts. So there are certainly people who have a will that won't require a probate administration, but it's because they've taken these separate and affirmative steps to make other plans. Sometimes it gets confusing for folks when they have a will that says one thing and then they do these probate avoidance strategies that leave those assets to someone else. And that can get confusing and you know, can kind of be a wrinkle in the plan. So it's important that you understand, you know, what your options are for each of the asset types that you have. And I would say it's also important that you understand how that all works together and, you know, what will be coming through the will versus what won't be. I think a lot of times people, there's confusion about, you know, what's happening.
So many questions around that you like sparked in my mind. So there are some probate avoidance things that someone can do. You're speaking as if things go very smoothly.
Yes.
We have the opportunity to help families through these situations where we come alongside families in the administrative process, the non-legal portion of that, which is handling all the personal stuff left behind and just everything, and including the real estate and whatnot. But it tends to be messy.
It is messy oftentimes.
Like, is there a clean version and is there a messy version, or is it all messy? Like what is? You know,
there are definitely estates that go well, like everything, you know, is smooth. Like that definitely happens.
Doesn't everybody want that?
Everybody wants that. And I would say it's most commonly somewhere in the middle. I would say vehicles commonly are like one of the things that trip us up the most. You know, that's an asset that's titled and that really requires us to play by the rules. Like there's really not an ability to just, you know, give somebody a vehicle without actually having the title transferred. Sometimes there will be assets or vehicles in someone's estate and the decedent didn't actually properly have title to it themselves before, you know, so sometimes we'll find these wrinkles that really complicate things. Oftentimes decedents pass and I'm sure you run into this all the time, their estate's not like this pristine home that's like show ready or like ready to hit the market. There's a lot of things that need to be taken care of. Maybe there's important documents or mementos or items that they need to locate or find. Maybe it's just an overwhelming amount of stuff. I commonly have decedents who pass and they own multiple homes, you know, so maybe it's more than one property. So yeah, it can be really, really messy. And sometimes it's hard to know where to start, where you can start, where you should start. You know,
that's actually a great question. Is like, where do you start? So someone passes away, like how do you get involved? When do you get involved? Does a family have to have legal advice? Maybe those are too many questions at the same time.
I think they're all related. So I think it's definitely good if you've had a loved one pass away, especially if they own assets like real estate or vehicles that are going to need to be insured and need to have taxes paid on them. And something's going to have to be done to to take care of these assets and keep them in good standing. I do always think it's great to reach out to an attorney, at least for a consultation. Most of us will meet with you, offer a free consultation and just kind of take a look at what's going on, and usually can provide some organizing and guiding principles to, at least sort of, orient you to the next questions that you should ask, the next things that you should dig up or look for. I always think it's a good idea to at least, touch base with someone. I think people avoid that. Oftentimes they're concerned about the expense. They're concerned about, how heavy of a lift that might be. But most times you can meet with an attorney without obligation, and sometimes just that 30-minute consultation, that touch base might save you a lot of hassle and money in the long run. I often find that people have maybe they're overly confident in what they think they know about the estate administration process, and they're kind of convinced that they know what the next step is, but it might not be correct, or it might not be correct as it applies to the facts of their loved one's estate. So
what if, are there legal issues that can happen in an estate? I hear of some, even trespassing, or not stealing, but you go in there, you grab your stuff out of mom's house, and then you're not the administrator, or it's not. So maybe speak to that. Are there some bad things people can do?
There are,
Yeah.
So, kind of who has, subsequent authority over that estate. All property
Yeah.
has an owner, right? Like,
Yes.
so if it's an estate that needs to go through probate administration, it might be in kind of this limbo until an administrator or an executor is appointed. Once they are appointed, they're going to have authority to, that's going to be their job to protect the assets and to distribute them according to, whether it's according to the statute of descent and distribution, which is kind of our one size fits all. Every Ohioan gets this, sort of free estate plan from the state if there's no will. So whether they have to distribute it according to that law, or whether they have to distribute it according to the will, or there's something in between, somebody is in charge. And so if you go in as someone who doesn't have authority or doesn't have authority yet, that can disrupt that, and you can run afoul of some of the rules.
Got it. Well, maybe on that same topic, like, what have you seen in your experiences in handling all these estates and even probate situations? What are some of the most common mistakes an administrator makes?
Yeah, I would say just, being, again, overly confident about maybe those conversations that happened with the decedent or within the family about how things were going to be distributed. Dad promised the car to my oldest brother, or Dad promised the car to this or that. And it's like, well, but it has a transfer on death designation to this person, or there isn't a transfer on death designation and it is going to have to pass through Ohio law, and there are some debts to pay. So we might have to sell the vehicle. You can't just give it to so-and-so. So I would say that's probably one of the most common mistakes that I see is people distributing assets or distributing property too soon or without any direction. And sometimes there are, debts of the estate that have to be paid in a specific order. And sometimes there's a distribution scheme that we have to follow, and that can be difficult to wind back. Also, if there is a will, sometimes people will start, making distributions if there's a specific gift left in the will. And it all really has to go, even under a will, on a real specific way, in a real specific order. There are creditors that have to be paid and debts that have to be satisfied first, and then we can start making that. And it can just be more difficult, more messy, and ultimately more expensive if you've started, scattering assets or started making distributions, and then we have to kind of unwind and correct some of those. So
I'm hearing like the legal process, and I'm hearing like emotional.
Oh, it's a very emotional.
How do you handle as a leader of or administrator, overseeing, helping, guiding an administrator and a family through this? How do you manage both legal and emotional?
What's the key? It's a real balance, and I think that's one of the things I always tell myself, just the facts, and so I try to keep it as be as compassionate as I can be, and as empathetic, certainly, because what happened and the decisions and the conversations that happen, it's all relevant and it all matters. However, there's going to be a specific way that we have to approach this estate. There's going to be a systematic and methodical way that we have to go through. So I think, kind of letting people tell their story is huge. There's a ton of emotion. There's a ton of fear and anxiety. And, death is really final. And what I find is that oftentimes if there was conflict in the family, or there was, some emotional situation, even if it was years ago, the finality of death kind of brings that to the surface. And sometimes people just need to get that out. They need to, they need to communicate that, and it needs to come to the table and be like, yeah, wow, I hear that, and I can totally see how you feel about that. And here's the process that we have to go through. So I think, letting people tell their story, having just radical empathy and respect for how difficult this is, and, just how loaded these situations can be is really important. And then also just guiding them through the framework, the good or bad, there is a really specific way these things have to be done. And so just kind of guiding them through that and saying, here, this is what we're dealing with. This is how we can approach this. I think is huge. Also communication. And I think a lot of the really hurt feelings and things that we have a hard time coming back from in families, when we sort of dial it back and, roll it back, it comes to miscommunication, not having sufficient communication, someone feeling like they're shut out, or, not involved in a decision. So I really try to, if anything, over communicate with families. And I think what's one of the good things about having legal representation is if there is conflict or it's difficult for you to communicate with a family member, or it might be emotional or explosive if you were the one delivering a message,
Sure.
When that comes from an attorney that's, just a neutral party,
Yep.
we're like, hey, this is what we have to do. I think sometimes that can be helpful. So preserving everyone's emotions, preserving relationships, and being sensitive to the fact that we have some things to do, and then you have to go on and still be a family, or still exist is really important too.
I bet your career as a counselor,
Yeah.
psychologist,
Absolutely.
really helps
Absolutely.
in those
Absolutely, for
situations. Do you
sure.
bill for both?
I wish, but no.
Right.
No, you get that for free.
That's cool. Yeah, that empathy and emotion is great, but I like how you said and. We also have things to take care of, so there's both. Do you find yourself spending, in some cases, more time on the emotional side than actually the...
For sure. And first, there are some beneficiaries of estates or some people involved in estates that might be all I do is just listen. I might not represent them. I might just represent the administrator of the estate, but it goes a long way for them to be able to call and just, tell their story. And I can say, thanks for letting me know that. And, just try to, preserve those relationships and be respectful of everyone's feelings.
Each situation seems, again, as you mentioned, personal, but how long does the probate process typically take?
Yeah, so it's usually going to be at least 6 months. After someone passes away, there is a statutory period that allows anyone who the decedent may have owed money to, so any creditor of the estate or for the decedent, to come forward for 6 months post-death. Okay. So it's almost impossible for us to wrap up an estate earlier than 6 months because of that creditor claim period. From there, though, it's commonly we're looking at a year. I would say 8 to 15 months is probably a good range in Ohio. Okay. There are definitely estates that go on for years. Okay. Because of various things. So the more complicated it is, the more assets that there are, the more wrinkles that we come up with those assets, the longer it takes. But I would say 8 to 12, 15 months is a good average. Okay.
And the bigger the estate, the more things need to be processed.
For
and
sure.
Obviously, probate's not necessarily someone is moving on daily, meaning like, you're not spending all of your effort, wrap up this case in a week and get all your things, but it just takes time.
It takes time, and a lot of times, we will file something, it will enter the docket at the court, and then it will be set for hearing in 30 days. And we'll have to wait for that to go, or we will need to provide notice to someone, and we'll need to wait for that time. So it's a lot of hurry up and wait in probate.
Hurry up, get this filed, and wait. So I hear stories of, I have a will. So my mother-in-law, this is personal, my mother-in-law lived with us for almost 10 years, and she would always talk about this will. I have everything taken care of. I've done it. I've done it. And we were really blessed to have her in our home. And for all those years, we cared for her, and her estate was super easy because she just did everything right over a period of time as she wrapped up the final years on with us and on here on earth. And so when you look at someone that says, "Hey, I did a will back in the 70s," like, do you ever update a will?
Yeah.
Like, how often should someone plan their, re-up their estate?
It's a great question, and I'm going to go back to my answers. It depends. So, one of the things that I always ask people is, are all the people that are mentioned in your will still alive? Sometimes you'll mention a person who's going to be your executor, and they've predeceased you, or they've passed away, or maybe they've lost capacity, or you've fallen out of relationship with them. That happens. Maybe you've had more children since you wrote your will, and there are people that you want to provide for that weren't alive when you wrote your will. So I always recommend that people keep those estate planning documents somewhere where they will have some regular contact with them, like maybe around the documents that you interact with at tax time every year, for instance, or your homeowner's insurance policy, or something that you interact with on an annual basis, and just look it over. And if your relationships with people who are receiving under the will, or who are named in a decision-making capacity in your powers of attorney, If there's something about them, maybe they've passed, maybe they've lost capacity, maybe they've moved away, maybe you're not in a relationship, maybe somebody has come into your life who would be better suited to serve in that roles. All of those things I think are things that are good to, maybe consider an update or a refresh. But, more than like how often it should be updated, I think the biggest thing is to be looking at it, at least annually, and you'll know if there are things that need.
I think that's great advice.
Updated.
Like an annual, maybe tax time. These important legal documents come out.
Yep.
So I know for our situation, it was like, oh well, I'm almost too busy to do this.
Yeah.
I'm young, I'm healthy, we're raising a young family, I'm invincible, nothing's going to happen. But when is the right time to plan your estate?
Yeah, if you have a home, if you have vehicles, if you have bank accounts, and if you have people who depend on you. So if you're a young family and you have kids, you have people who depend on you to sign permission forms or, give the okay to medical treatment on their behalf. All of those things are things that really do warrant having a plan and, having some succession, plan in place to kind of hand off those responsibilities and take care of those assets.
That's a great answer. So we think of estates as like, oh well, I'll deal with that eventually
for old
when
people.
I need to. That's for old people. Yeah. I know the catalyst for us and our family was like a knee replacement. I had my knee replaced, and again, it's a very safe surgery, right? However, it was like, okay, we're just gonna allow this to be the time that we say, stop talking about it for 15 years and start doing it. So, complicated estates. What happens when, like the heir process? You think the will's very clear, so someone looks at it and says, "Oh, this is great. Mom told me I get the house," but yet there's that's not necessarily like how it plays out.
Sure.
So how do you search for heirs? Is there a long process? Is that, maybe not you specifically, but how does that process work, the heir?
So anytime we are administering a decedent's estate through probate, we have to provide the court with a list of all of the decedent's heirs. So that would be their surviving spouse, that would be their children. If any of their children predeceased the decedent, it would be, their children's children. So Ohio has the statute of descent and distribution that's going to outline, who is considered an heir. So it will tell us, who we need to find.
Okay.
And sometimes that's complicated, sometimes for families where there's lots of people involved, that can take a long time. There are specific services and companies that will help us, find and locate heirs. It's getting easier with the internet now. It's kind of hard to hide. But that's kind of like the first thing we do in an estate is provide the court with a list of all of the decedent's heirs, or who is, that statute also is going to outline who has the legal right to notice about the will being admitted to probate or to someone applying to administer the estate if there's not a will. So that statute really is our guideline and outlines who we need to notify and kind of how we need to interact with those beneficiaries or heirs of the estate.
Got it. So here at Exactly, we've gone through extensive probate training. So we are certified probate real estate experts.
Awesome.
Which just simply means we understand the process. We feel we can sympathetically relate to the timelines, to kind of cost of these things.
That's huge. I think there's sometimes, in people will go to sell a property and there's just this real disconnect between how fast the real estate company wants to move and the reality of when we might have the ability to sell that property. So that's great.
So what are some things that you wish every real estate agent knows, whether they're certified in probate or not? Because you're dealing with real property, you're figuring it out. You say, hey, we got this case that there's some real property involved. How do you start looking at that? What's your approach towards real estate?
Yeah, it really varies. If there's a will, sometimes the will will give the heirs specific, or the beneficiaries or the executor, the specific power to sell the real estate. So we may be able to list that property and sell it while we're administering the estate. So it might not necessarily be a circumstance where we have to wait for court approval, or we have to wait for a specific phase of the estate administration. So we may be able to get that up, and the executor of that will might have the power that they need to get that rolling. Sometimes we find out that maybe there are liens on the property we didn't know about. There are unpaid taxes and liens associated with that. There are HELOCs or just, other things, the other ways that property had been used for collateral. Some decedents had benefited from the Medicaid program to pay for long-term care or insurance premiums. So sometimes we're dealing with the Office of Medicaid Estate Recovery. And, that can take time and negotiation to reach an agreement on how we're going to satisfy that claim. So I guess I would just want, realtors to know that it's complicated, and, each circumstance, there can be a lot of surprises. Like the more we get into things, we do that title search, and sometimes that reveals things that are surprising. So I would just say we've got to be flexible, and might have to petition the court for some specific permission to sell these properties, and it's just going to take patience and be ready for surprises. And they're almost all solvable and work throughable, but they take time and agility.
I love how you said that, like problem solving. You mentioned that earlier. You love solving problems. That really is what this process is all about. You have all these, the leftover things. Maybe they weren't. Some of them were buttoned up. Some of them might not have been. Some of them are complicated. Somewhere in between, right?
A lot of people don't talk about their financial struggles, or the fact they haven't been able to pay their taxes, or the fact.
I want to interrupt you. You think that's general or generational?
I
meaning
do.
like my parents never talked about their finances to us.
Absolutely. And so I think that's really common. I also think that, if your decedent was elderly, I see it commonly that things might start to go wrong in the property. Maybe there's not a working toilet, or maybe the sink has been clogged for a long time, or the breaker throws every time they plug in the toaster or whatever, and they don't tell anybody. They might not have the resources to fix it or to repair it. And so sometimes it's a shock at how much disrepair. These properties have gone through leaks in roofs and slipping foundation walls and things like that. So sometimes it can be a real shock, the condition of the property when you get in there. I think a lot of folks feel overwhelmed. They don't want to have to leave their home. They don't want to, let this not be the thing that puts me into assisted living, or they put me in a condo, or whatever. So they'll just kind of button up and keep that secret. So I would say if you still have your loved one and they're still living at home, look for those things, ask those questions, see if they might need some help with those things proactively. But those are some common surprises that we get after someone passes. And then the other thing is just, sometimes they were having significant financial difficulties, borrowed against the house, maybe had a reverse mortgage on the home. Unpaid taxes are really common, foreclosures on the home. So it's really common and sometimes really shocking to families.
So that's so interesting. We're seeing this exact same thing. Just last week, 2 different families had situations where they were like, it was almost like a sense of pride, and they were embarrassed to have us come and help, like just see the property. Primarily because it was like, oh, mom's house got way worse than what I thought it was.
Exactly. Yep.
Or my deceased husband was a hoarder, and so it's like there's these so almost a sense of pride. Going back to the emotional side of it, it's like.
And I think sometimes people feel like maybe those things are too scary to bring to a realtor or to an attorney. We hear them all the time. If that's your situation, you're not alone. We hear it all the time. It's really common. I had a family that found out that their loved one had taken out a gym membership just to use the restroom facilities because their plumbing had completely stopped working in the house. So sometimes there are just things that that happen that you're unaware of, and things really get out of control. But you're not alone, and we hear it all the time, and it's solvable. We can work through it. So don't be embarrassed. Don't let the shame or the embarrassment or the overwhelm about it be what stops you from getting help.
Yeah, we've seen families, like administrators, just get stuck.
Absolutely.
And they don't know. And you talk about timelines. Of course, that's going to be a lot longer because you're just paralyzed. Like, well, where do I start? How do I start? Who do I talk to? How do I manage all this stuff, the personal property, the real property, the debts, the
There's
financial
no liquid
piece.
funds. Like we need, we're going to have some money when we sell this property, but right now we don't have any. And so, there's a lot of things that we can do creatively. There are people that will get paid at closing or, whatever. So there's usually a solution to your problem, if not all the time, but very much close, very close all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here for. We're here to find those creative solutions and help you through it.
Yeah, that's great. If you could go back to probate, if you could design like the perfect probate system, what would it look like?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I think I would make sure everyone understands it first. I think that would be like a class in school, is that you have to understand, what this looks like.
Like a PBS special,
exactly,
you're saying?
Like,
right?
yeah, it's like you don't pass go until you at least understand like the basics. Because I think, just people not knowing what they're in for is one of the biggest things. And I think a lot of them, if they knew, they would plan differently.
That's right.
So I think that would be the first thing I would do, is just make sure everyone understands what they're in for and what their options are.
Yeah, for sure. I think education is critical. That's why we're having this podcast. We want to educate people on the basics of it. Like if you could give any encouragement, what I'm hearing is, do your estate planning now while you're alive.
Check on your loved ones now.
Yeah. Communicate. I think that sounds like, I've almost wondered if the better we do at communicating while we're alive, let's say, on this side, versus waiting for our family to deal with the mess, have you correlated any of that? Does that actually go smoother for families that kind of like are talking about these things ahead of time? Does it go smoother?
For sure. Yeah. And I would, on the emotional side of it, I would say there's so much less guilt, there's so much less uncertainty, there's so much less feeling stuck. On the administration side, when someone does pass or someone does lose capacity, if they've had that conversation with their loved one and they kind of know what they're in for, they know what their loved one's priorities were, they know what their loved one's intentions were, I think it can just be such a different experience to wrap up someone's estate when you've had those conversations during their lifetime.
Cool.
Yeah.
When you get started on creating an estate plan, what are some of the common things you look at?
Yeah, the first thing I always ask people is to tell me about their family. So tell me about, who's in your family. Tell me about the people in your family. Does anyone have, a specific issue? It could be anything from, estrangement in families. A lot of people are embarrassed about that, or they might have a loved one with a disability or with a mental health condition or with addiction. Let's talk about all those things. We can plan and prepare and do what's best for your situation if you're dealing with any of those. So learning about your family, learning about, what's important to you. Most people have, specific priorities that are unique to their family, and their estate plan can and should reflect, those priorities. So that's the biggest thing, is tell me about your family. Tell me about what assets you have. Sometimes someone will come in and say something like, I have an airplane, or I have a house in Arizona and a house in Florida, and that's going to be a different approach, or I have a business. So if you have some of those, more non-traditional assets, things that are beyond a house, a car, and some bank accounts.
That's right.
It can be really important to plan for those specifically. So if you have businesses, if you have homes out of state, if you have a lot of stuff like vehicles, jet skis, campers, motorcycles. So I have some estates that have dozens and dozens of those kind of things. Those can be huge probate, but easy to avoid if we do some planning. So I always want to know, what kind of stuff do you have? So the way we plan for that is going to be different. I would say those are the biggest things. What's your family like? What are your goals? What's important to you? And then, what are we planning for? So let's look at all of those and figure out the most cost-effective, low-stress, family preserving, way to go about those.
So I did a little research and found out that you recently were named the best amongst lawyers in Medina County, or is it just
so that was the Medina County Gazette's Reader's Choice Award for Best of the Best. So really grateful to their readership and to our past clients for
because you've been
honor.
doing law for 5-ish years
Yeah,
or so, and you built this great firm, and you're getting all these great accolades and stuff like that. So what are you guys doing? Why are you different maybe than some other?
I would say probably just our client-centered approach and, that real, consideration of your family, your goals, your relationships. And I view that as important, if not more important than, what are we going to do with your stuff? How are we going to get this, buttoned up? I want to know about you. I want to know about your family. I want to know, what you like about how things are going, what you wish things, what happened, and how can we get you closer, to those goals and preserve what's important to you. And, I think maybe that's what sets us apart.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know you're super personable.
Oh, thank you.
It's easy to talk, right, for sure. So, well, great. As far as like the conversation, I don't know if you have anything else specifically that you'd love to say to an audience that's thinking through it, as far as a wrap up.
I think my big takeaways that I would want people to know is to, have these conversations with your loved ones. The earlier you talk about these things, the more choice and control that you have. When it comes down to it, I really feel like that's what dignity is. Dignity is having choice, having control, and, having those conversations early is really the best way to preserve those. These are maybe not the easiest topics to bring up at the Thanksgiving table or to, broach with your parents that have never talked about money or finances. But knowledge really is power. And unfortunately, a lot of these are choices that either we can make or life will make them for us.
That's right.
So I really want people to have, as much choice, control, and power as they can. Don't let shame, don't let guilt, don't let overwhelm and confusion, get in the way. There are people out there that can and will help you. It's what we do. It's what we live for. So reach out, whether it's your real estate agent, whether it's your attorney, reach out and find help. And there's a path forward.
That's great. Well, keep doing awesome work.
Thank you.
That's
You
great.
too.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you.